welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. This is actually the last little wrap-up catch-up that I need to do. So this is my wrap-up for the month of February 2024. And then I'm all caught up. So love that for me. As usual, we will just dive straight into a little bit of statistics, and then we will do our reviews of the books from, I don't know why I'm using like a plural. Then I will do reviews of the books that I read, starting from my lowest ranked read all the way through my highest ranked read of the month. So without further ado, let's jump into our statistics. In the month of February, I read 7 books, totaling 4,695 pages. And as always, a lot of this was immersion reading, so that also equated to 58 hours of audiobook listening. And this month was a slightly lower rated month than typical. It wasn't terrible, with an average rating of around 3.9 stars. So with that being said, we will jump straight into the books themselves, starting with my least favorite read of the month, and that was Reaper's Gale by Steven Erikson. This is book 7 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And this one was kind of disappointing to me because we were finally seeing all of the characters from the multiple different places around the world that we've been introduced to throughout this series. And they were all kind of converging in one location. But then it just felt kind of anticlimactic with what happened there. There was some cool world building information, particularly around Scavendari and like the Tista Edward v. the Tista, whatever, the Tista stuff. So like that was fun and all, but like it just, I don't know, we introduced so many like ways that this plot thread could have been so cool, and like the converging point was kind of like a side plot, and the really cool thing where we were pursuing the dragon god was kind of just like not that impactful. So it was just overall kind of disappointing, because as it started and we were really getting going, I was like, ooh, cool, yes, love it. And then I was like, for that? Okay. And like the books are unreasonably long, and it has the typical issues that I have with Erikson, where it's just too much focus on kind of cryptic dialogue and philosophical musings that feel kind of repetitive and not distinct to any one character or place, mixed with kind of not as much plot payoff as I'm used to having. There's usually some big epic thing, and there were moments, but it wasn't quite on the same level as previous entries. Then I finally concluded my journey with is it the Dark Artifices? Because it goes, Infernal Devices is the like old-timey one, then Dark Artifices. So I finished Dark Artifices, book 3, Queen of Errand Darkness by Cassandra Clare. And this is the follow-up trilogy that's more of a direct sequel to the original Mortal Instrument series. And then she has her prequel series where you have the Infernal Devices, and then its follow-up is The Last Hours. And so this one, it was still fun. Like Shadowhunters is very campy, CW, kind of like Buffy-esque, but a little bit younger. It just gives those vibes. And Queen of Errand Darkness 1 was far too long. 2, like it had this really big focus on almost like modern politics that I just wasn't really there for, and then it didn't feel resolved. It definitely felt like we needed more books following this to see what happens next, which I find really irritating. Like if this is supposed to be a trilogy and this is the end to the trilogy, there needs to be some kind of satisfying conclusion, and there wasn't really. And I was like, for all of that page length, that is the conclusion that I get, and it like is so clearly setting up for like more, which I don't mind if there's some unanswered questions and like you leave a little bit of an opening to continue if you want to, but like this literally did not feel like a conclusion, and it was really irritating. So that really obviously like hindered my enjoyment of it, but it was still like fun enough. Like it was still similar campy vibes to what we're used to from Miss Cassie Clare. It wasn't like breaking the mold on anything, but just like one having the like very like modern politicking kind of bleeding into this fantasy world was kind of annoying, and then I didn't like that. And then I also did not really I just did not appreciate being left that way. The next book I'll talk about is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is book 1 in the Dandelion Dynasty, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. And the reason that it wasn't like 4 stars or higher, just like full liking to loving, is because the first, I want to say like 30 or 40%, it felt like kind of disconnected short stories or novella style, novelette, whatever. Each chapter just felt like this kind of separate story following some random person in some random part of the Empire, and I just was like, what are we doing? Why do I care about all these disparate people? Like, that's just not a storytelling structure that I vibe with particularly. But then once we got past like the 50% mark and on, and I started to see how things were going to come together, and I started understanding what was going on with Kunigaru and I almost said Mappo, but that's Malazan, Mata. And like once I understood and saw their dynamics and like what was going on, like it kind of clicked more. So I think the second half is probably like 4 to 4.25 stars, and then the first half is like 3 to 3.5 stars because it just felt too disjointed for me. And also, since this is supposed to be a fantasy series, I will warn you, there is very little fantasy happening. Like, sure, it's not our world, but also like they have like almost no magic. There's a little bit of gods meddling, but like barely. And that's really it. It really feels much more like almost historical fiction, or you know what I mean? Like it has like that kind of vibe. And it almost, especially the first half, felt like reading something like Fire and Blood, where it's like a history of this world, but without having the buy-in to the world that I already had with the Game of Thrones world. When I read Fire and Blood, I already knew I loved the world and was finding out cool, fascinating details. Grace of Kings, it introduces you with the history, and that's a little bit of a tougher sell because it's like, But I did overall enjoy my time, and I will definitely be continuing. And Alicia from Birdie in the Books and I actually had a full spoiler-filled discussion about the Grace of Kings. So if you want to see that, I will link it in the description below, and you can go and check out more spoiler-filled thoughts for Grace of Kings. But we will move on to the next book. And this was actually quite a shock. So I read House of Flame and Shadow. This is book 3 in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, and I gave it 4 stars. So if you've been following me for any length of time, you will know that book 1 in Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, I really quite loved. I grew up reading a lot of urban fantasy with Laurel K. Hamilton, with Anita Blake and Mary Gentry, and like with Buffy and Charmed, and like urban fantasy is like a comfort zone for me. And so having this urban-esque fantasy that is Crescent City, because it's obviously not our world, I really liked it. But then House of Sky and Breath, between the romance and just the dialogue and plot choices, where we spent a lot of time where the main character actually had information that they were hiding and was putting friends and loved ones in life and death situations for what? Like, it was... It still like makes me really irritated about it. I have a full spoiler-filled like rant review video about House of Sky and Breath because I hated it that much. But I am who I am, and I don't know how to DNF like series or whatever. I will still finish things. And so I did read House of Flame and Shadow, and surprisingly, I actually quite liked it. But the kind of funny thing is that our main couple is separated, like physically like apart for like a solid third or 40% of this book. And I was like, yes, keep them apart. And then it was very plot focused. It gives a lot of interesting like lore and history of all of the Maas first. So Akatar and Throne of Glass, because it is kind of like connected universe-esque type situation. So we got a lot of like lore and history, and it had this element. So I don't know about you, but I loved like the Tomb Raider movies with Angelina Jolie growing up, and just like that vibe. And I got that vibe for parts of this story where we're finding out this ancient history by kind of like spelunking, and I eat that up like nobody's business. So like those were by far my favorite parts. We also had some really dramatic stuff at the end that scientifically didn't really make sense, but like it was whatever. It was kind of still fun enough. This is definitely like the equivalent of like a blockbuster movie where you're just like eating your popcorn and kind of along for the fun ride. I will say that it did feel like there was a lot crammed into this book. Maybe a couple too many POVs, maybe a couple too many side things. And it also feels very like final with how things are wrapped up. And so I'm just curious, because I do know that from interviews, Sarah J. Maas said that there will be continuations in this world, but I'm having a feeling that it's going to be more like continuations, like A Court of Silver Flames, and not like a true sequel, because it feels like this arc is completed in House of Flame and Shadow. So if you are somebody like me who didn't know if they wanted to continue onwards after House of Sky and Breath, I would say give House of Flame and Shadow a chance, because it is really fun and it is kind of like the end. But that's for people like me who are very completionist. So like, I mean, if you hated it so much that you don't want to, then like, that's also fine. Then my other 4-star read of the month was The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the start to a new series. I don't really know how many books it's going to be from her, following this older pirate captain on this kind of like Aladdin-esque vibe adventure where we're kind of like hunting relics and doing things and getting kind of caught up in like swashbuckling adventure. And I did think it was a lot of fun. Unlike most people though, I didn't find Amina like the most compelling. She felt kind of, I don't know, like cliche to me, this like overly aggressive, like female captain. And I was just like, I mean, okay, it's fine. I also didn't realize that her works are kind of set in our world, and I don't know why, but like traveling the Indian Ocean and having these real world places just kind of like threw me off a little bit. I didn't realize it was going to be so much like historical fantasy-esque. So I was like, oh, like I didn't expect it. I didn't dislike that, but it also like took a while for us to actually get anywhere, because this was another book where probably the first 40 or even 50% were kind of getting the crew back together to go on the adventure. And like once we finally got to the adventure, then I started feeling like it was more fun. But like the first chunk of it just felt like kind of historical fiction, bopping around, talking to some people. And like I was like, okay. And so that's why it's just 4 stars and it wasn't a little bit higher. And that brings us to my 2 4.5 star reads of the month. So the first of them that I'll talk about is, okay, so this is a shocker to everybody, including me. So like people like Evie and all these other stans of Robin Hobb will be so thrilled to know that Fool's Errand, I loved it. 4.5 stars. Like it was the emotional journey that I kept expecting from Hobb finally came to fruition in Fool's Errand. It was also like a complete thought where one of my major gripes, especially with Farseer, is that like the end of that trilogy doesn't feel like an end, and each individual book barely feels like it has like any kind of payoff or anything. So to have a book where we had a goal, we went on a journey, we had an ending, and like it was such a complete thought in the one book, I was like, okay, Robin Hobb. And like some of the emotional moments like really got to me in Fool's Errand, like full on getting misty-eyed while I was reading, because this was while my husband was playing his 3rd or 4th, I don't know, he was doing the honor mode to get his trophies or whatever for Baldur's Gate 3, so I had time to read more. And so I was reading it and like getting all misty-eyed, and he was like, are you okay? So like it was so good. And like I also really enjoyed seeing like hunting cats and having like telepathic cat companions, because we do typically get dogs, or for Fitz it was the wolf, but still very dog-like. So we get a lot of like that kind of perspective, but also having cats. And like, yeah, they were kind of stereotypical, like aloof cats, but it was just kind of hilarious to me. There was like this one cat in particular owned by this lady that he would visit sometimes, and just like the cat being like, pick up the cat, and he's like, no, pick up the cat, you'll feel better. And I'm like I just thought it was hilarious, and I kind of loved it. And they also had hunting cats, where they actually had like these cushions on their saddles, and they would like set them off after birds, and like that was just kind of cool. Like I've never seen hunting cats, and they weren't like big cats, they were like, I don't know, like probably medium-ish sized cats, and just having them to like train and be bred to be like hunting cats. I don't know, like I'm obviously a cat person, I have my kitties, so just like it was kind of fun seeing those differences and just having that full complete thought and finally feeling the emotions from Hobb. I loved Fool's Errand, and I'm really excited. I recently started Golden Fool, and so I'm hoping, but I do hear that like Golden Fool is a little bit more meandering again, a little bit more like what I would expect from Hobb, so we'll see. But at least I have Fool's Errand will forever probably be maybe peak Hobb for me, and that's okay. At least I have one. And then finally, we will talk about my favorite book of the month, and that was Fathomfolk by Eliza Chan. This is the start to a new fantasy series, and it was just fun and different from what I had been expecting. So it is a lot more contained of a story where we are in this kind of capital city where we're seeing a blending of these like sea creatures and more human cultures, where like literally there's like skyscrapers, and then in different sets areas of the city, there's like underwater. So then you have the mixing of these Fathomfolk, so like kelpies or like other underwater creatures, sea dragons and things like that, kind of in this mixing pot with humans. And so there's obviously a lot of kind of tension brought about by having these different cultures and these different beings kind of coexisting and cohabitating. So it was very much like a politically tense thing where we were seeing kind of this rebellion rise, and the ramifications as one of our main characters kind of got caught up in that whole plot. So I just had so much fun. It was like such a unique setting. I really like underwater settings because, like, I don't know, Little Mermaid and like all of that kind of story. I don't love boats and like seafaring, but if we're under the sea, I'm kind of here for it. So Fathomfolk really like kind of scratched that itch and was this kind of fun political drama rebellion, but like on a smaller scale. And then it definitely left off somewhere where we found out a lot more about kind of the lore of these different cities and like what's been going on there. So I am just so curious where this is going to go. And I'm just so happy that it was like so much fun. And I haven't heard literally anybody kind of picking it up or talking about it. So if you like political fantasy, underwater settings, kind of like sea-esque creatures, and you want like a fun, like kind of bombastic, fast-paced political rebellion type situation, but I'm not talking about like overthrowing empires. I'm talking about like chanting in the streets with like signs, like modern kind of protest type rebellion. I think you'd really like it. There are some elements that are clearly pulled from the experience of like refugees, because there are things happening to some of the like normal Fathomfolk cities where they're becoming uninhabitable. So there are people fleeing to this city as refugees and kind of the ramifications that come with refugees and the othering and that kind of thing. So if that would be triggering for you, maybe this isn't the book for you, but I thought it was so good and I need more people to read Fathomfolk. But those are the 7 books that I got to in the month of February. If you just want to let me know that you're here and leave an emoji, leave some kind of sea emoji, so coral or something to go for Fathomfolk. If you want to talk to me about any of these books, please, I'd always love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you want to talk spoilers, just make sure you say spoilers and hit enter a bunch of times so people don't get accidentally spoiled. But other than that, please do all the things. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish chats like this from me. But that will do it for today's video. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!